Hello and welcome to the Help My Wealth podcast, Money Rules or Money Rules. Here at Help My Wealth, we are all about empowering financial success in our community of listeners. We hope you find today's topic both informative and helpful. Hi and welcome back to the Help My Wealth, Money Rules or Money Rules podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Logan, and today I have with me Hamish Ferguson. Hamish, thank you for coming.
You're welcome.
Hamish is a financial planner and a mortgage broker, and he's actually one of the people that helped found Help My Wealth, and also you wrote some of the learning modules in regards to that.
Absolutely.
So tell me, Hamish, how has your week been?
Look, it's been great. I was supposed to go to a conference this week, but I decided to stay behind, and it's been very productive. I've got a few of those jobs out of the way that might not have got done otherwise.
I was going to say that's not always a bad thing, is it?
No, it's not.
So tell us, Hamish, for those that aren't aware, your background, you started in mortgage broking how long ago?
2001. So, a bit over 20 years ago now.
Right. And then what led you from mortgage broking into financial planning?
Yeah, so I had a few financial planners that I'd sort of known. I had my own financial planner. And I guess I found when I started to get clients that were asking me, what do they do next? They've got the home and they needed some more guidance. And as a mortgage broker, we had to be a little bit careful with what we could recommend and talk about. And so I started referring to financial advisors. And I guess what I found was that most of them had probably a different style or a different approach to the way I was really hoping my clients would get looked after. None of them were bad. It's just different. And so I just sort of woke up one day and went, well, how hard can this be? I'll just get qualified myself.
Yeah, why not? So it's got a situation here. You've got, businesses growing. You've got a few people now doing, mortgage broking. You're taking over the financial planning side of it. At what point did it lead you from there to this idea of actually, getting Help My Wealth off the ground and actually creating a niche there for people that didn't need financial planning yet, but being left to their own devices would not be helpful for them?
So, what's interesting is, and I don't know how many financial planners feel this way, but when you get into financial planning, you think it's all going to be about, investment and helping the clients and just taking those steps. And you think everyone needs a financial planner. And then as you get in there and you realize, well, wait a second, to do this job well, you have to be a little bit careful with this because, not everyone does need that heavy, process and what's the word I'm trying to think of here? That they just don't need that over the top financial service. All right.
Yeah, I mean, I guess for most financial planners, you're looking at where's the person now, where's their retirement, what funds do they have available, what are you going to invest in, which class of investment are you going to be using, and so it's a very in-depth process. I mean, you end up with how many page document do you get? 40, 50 page document at the end?
Yeah, add a few pages. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, you're paying for that service though, aren't you? I mean, it's not a free service. So you're expecting to get a really robust plan of where you're going to be heading.
And you don't want to go down that path with a client unless you're actually going to meet their expectations.
That's right.
And it's the right level of service for that person.
That's right.
So what I found was as I got into financial planning and this idea of Help My Wealth, I guess, came over a period of time where I thought, okay, there's a gap in the middle here between what a mortgage broker does and what a financial planner does. And I've spent a long time trying to fight against the system to actually enable myself to be able to deliver that service that actually filled that gap.
Yeah, and I think we've discussed this many times before. Someone comes along, think in the mortgage broking world, and they've got their deposit together, they've got two jobs, they've been in those jobs for a while, everything's stable, they've got savings. It's an easy process. How much money do you want? Yes, great. Yes, bank will accept that. Right, go find a house. And then in the financial planning area, someone comes along, okay, I'm retiring in 20 years. Here's all the investments and cash and so forth I've got. I'm more than happy to pay a couple of grand for you to give me a plan for the future because that's where I'm at. Great, nice and easy process. But then you have someone come along who, for instance, if we go into the mortgage broking world, who doesn't have their deposit saved or maybe their debt level is just a little bit too high to be able to service that loan correctly. Or they've got other issues and other expectations that need to be adjusted in regards to being able to achieve that goal. Now, that person is probably not going to be right for a financial planner, are they?
Absolutely. And this is where it's this double-edged sword, because you get that type of client that it's pretty easy that they're not ready for a financial planner yet. There's a need there, but how do you justify charging or asking somebody to pay further money when they're trying to get on top of those things? All right.
Yep.
So, but then, what's interesting is that, even as a mortgage broker, there's been lots of people that we've looked over the years where just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. All right. So, but as a mortgage broker, we're not really trained to answer that question. All right. And the whole industry is not really geared around it. So, where's that education and capacity to be able to help people make the right decisions at the right time?
Yes. So look, Help My Wealth came from that idea, and then we sat down and went, what does somebody need to be able to achieve their goals? So to start off with, you've got to get your budget under control. You've got to get cash flow and budget under control. So, we provided that AI app so that you can actually get a live feed from your bank feed, set your budget up, but then you can actually see on a day-to-day basis, am I achieving my budget or not? Because what I find for a lot of people who use a spreadsheet or something else in regards to their budget is maybe once a month they'll look at it and see whether or not they have gone over or under their spend. But the main thing I find is that people, they like to maybe not lie to themselves is the right word, but they like to trick themselves into believing that they're not actually spending as much on shopping or eating out or coffees or shoes or, buying widgets, whatever it is for them. And that app actually, makes that really effective, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. It's surprising how many times you sit in front of a couple and they load it all up and start getting a little bit of information. And that is one of the benefits of it, is that it provides a snapshot that's reasonably accurate, literally within minutes. But then you get this almost pause from clients where they go, oh,
yeah.
So this is what's going on.
Yeah. And I think what's interesting is that, you've said before, you're not here to force someone to do a budget that you want. The concept is that they get information and then they can decide their own budget. So if they recognise that they're spending, $500 a week on groceries rather than the $400 they assumed, that's now their choice to either increase their budget or decrease their spending.
Yeah. So look, I haven't exhaustively looked at all of the other, budgeting services that are out there, but I do remember one key client that came to me and they were struggling and they said to me, "Oh, Hamish, we've tried all of these other programs and none of them work. Don't go there." I just said to them, "Okay, look, I'll do this one for free with you if you like, because I can really see that this is here. This is needed." And it was at the end, they said, "Okay, I can tell you exactly why yours is different, right? And this is working for us. And it's because you centered everything on what's important to us. And you didn't tell us how to run our own budget. You let us come up with the numbers ourselves."
Yeah.
And inherently most of us know, you won't do something anywhere near as motivated if it's not important to you.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And look, so we've got Help My Wealth comes up, we've got the budgeting stuff under control, and then, you and I were discussing that, from a financial literacy point of view, that especially younger Australians, but Australians in general, often don't have a great grasp of financial planning or investments or cash flow or budgeting or where they can go. So, how did that whole idea come about in regards to the actual financial literacy program?
Yeah, so I guess it starts with, almost a fact that we're just not taught about money at school.
No, we're not.
So and our parents quite often, because they weren't really taught, they don't really, it doesn't seem like that's a really common thing. No. And as teenagers, we probably don't listen very well, and so so it starts with we don't have that knowledge, right? So then the second part of that is, well, what do people want these days? So I've got a couple of kids that the thought of going to uni and reading 400-page books and doing theses and all the rest of it, it's just too much. Like, I think our capacity to really process large amounts of information has reduced over the years. So we needed a way of putting out information that was easy to process and digest. But, we also needed to make sure that it actually helped with the efficiency. So we want to keep the costs down on this. So because it's not financial advice. So it has to be cost effective. It has to be simple. And thirdly, it has to be delivered by people that actually know what they're talking about. Right. Yeah. So I might have a bit of a grasp of psychology and personalities and all the rest of it, but I'm not an expert. I shouldn't be telling people things about psychology. All right. So we've got to get people to actually do this stuff that know how to do it well.
So tell me, what are the sort of professionals that you ended up bringing in to help my wealth, and how did that come about?
So the first one I actually realised was it was around psychology. It was the fact that whilst finance is about maths, it's our personalities, it's our stories, it's how we've grown up that so much impact how we actually deal with money. And so it was the psychology aspect of this that was really, really important. So I was working on a project with another lady who was a money coach as well, and I was fascinated by what's that journey. And so that conversation led to her coming on board as a professional as well, because again, once you get the psychology right, then actually understanding how that relates to money and that money coaching type thing is really important as well. So that's part of what we do. And then what I realized is people sort of need these principles to be able to work through. So, understanding the basics of investments, understanding how super works, what's the stock market, that was all part of it. And then obviously last but not least is the budgeting aspect of it, is actually teaching people to come up with an effective way of managing their money that doesn't take hours.
Yeah. And I think you hit the nail on the head there when you talked about it not being taught in schools. So I know when I was at school and I did economics, it was very big picture. It was very macro. It was about, the Australian economy and what the government does and the levers they use and all that sort of stuff and rules and regulations. It wasn't, hey, if you want to get a house deposit, this is what you have to do. Hey, if the Reserve Bank changes the interest rate, this is how they change it. This is why they change it. And this is how it will impact, your day-to-day payments.
Yeah, well, look, nothing gets the education system because, it's a very controlled environment to schools. They don't have the time to actually teach that. And I'm sure most of us would, reflect on our schooling. And it's very much, the subjects you do are very much around that next step, which is about university or trade or whatever. It's about getting a job. It's not about running life. Yeah. It is a big problem.
Look, we've discussed this before, but the Melbourne Institute, they produced that Hilda survey, and that really looked at the financial literacy of young people. Were you surprised by some of the results that came out with that?
No, not really. I think my reflections on youth and what's important to them is typically it's not money. I think I read a report that talked about that it's actually our youth that have the most amount of disposable income. All right. So, but typically when you've got more money than you need, then you don't put time into managing that and really coming up with systems. It's only later on in life when you start having a family or have to start paying rent and things like that it starts becoming quite significant.
So look, I think what's really important to note here is that, so the Hilda survey show that those under 25 are the least literate, financially speaking, in Australia, particularly males, even more so than females. But what's interesting to note, I think, is that it's not saying that those under 25 are stupider than those over 35 or that they just haven't cared, because when people that are 35 or 45, when they were 25, I think they also were the most illiterate when it came to finances, because you've had to teach yourself. So if you're, 35, you've had an extra 10 years to learn about finances and learn about money. If you're 45, you've had an extra 20 years to learn about money and finances. You've had to go that direction. So I don't think it's so much about, young people aren't understanding finances and older people understand it better. I just think that over time we actually educate ourselves. And that's one of the beauties that Help My Wealth have here is we're saying, okay, hang on, here's a program that you can actually go through and get all those basic understanding for financial literacy.
So I read somewhere else that when we're young, we want fame and fortune.
Yeah.
All right. So obviously Help My Wealth is probably a little bit more around the fortune than the fame. All right. So we want the fortune. We don't really know how to get it. And these days, it's quite often we're looking to YouTube and online to be able to find these ideas that we come up with. So, but I guess I want to go back to reinforce that we typically only put time and energy into things when they become pressure points.
Yes.
So, so we've all had those pressure points in life where, hey, I've left home, now I've got to pay rent and now I have to start focusing on money. Right. So, but that doesn't mean it's a pressure point, because if I'm earning enough, then I just do life.
Yeah.
Right. So it's only when I get into either bad habits or my circumstances change that all of a sudden I go, oh, so money doesn't grow on trees. I have to now start thinking about how I allocate this money and what do I do it for. So it really comes back to that, what's important to you at that stage of life. And I think financial literacy is about saying, hey, we've got to try and educate people that financial literacy should be taught earlier so that we've got the right habits and skills for when we get older.
Yeah, yeah. And so, look, if we go back to you being a financial planner, currently they say that the statistics about 30% of people use financial planning, but it's quite a large majority of people that agree that financial advice is important. So, at what point did you turn around and go, well, hang on a second, I need to provide this other avenue through Help My Wealth that people can actually get financial planning? Because I know that for you, caring for your clients and actually being an advocate for them is really high on your priority list. But do you think it's just a matter of cost as to why there's so many people agree that financial planning is important, but then there's only 30% that actually go ahead with it? Is it just a cost thing, do you think?
Look, I mean, the industry has made some mistakes.
Yep.
All right. So I definitely think that, from a trust perspective, financial advice as an industry has had some challenges. All right.
Yeah.
So, but in all honesty, as part of my journey, the Royal Commission that happened, 4 or 5 years ago now, was a big part of this, because we were able to deliver advice, I'd say fairly affordable back then. Right.
Yep.
But the Royal Commission really changed that. And I think the average advisor probably had to triple their fees during that time. So it was actually having a lot of conversations with a lot of people to say, hey, I don't mind if you stop using me, but I can't do it for this price anymore. That really made it, I guess it really hit me in the face that this is a big issue. Right.
So do you want to just explain that to people? Because I don't think the average person understands that. So, pre the Royal Commission, post the Royal Commission, why did your prices have to change? What actually occurred in the Royal Commission to make it not feasible for you to give, easy, cheap and good advice?
So the process and depth of how advice comes about changed. So I would my guess is that an advice document might have taken us 6 to 8 hours prior to the Royal Commission, and it jumped to about 18 to 20 hours afterwards.
So it was really around more the Royal Commission saying, right, if you're going to be a financial planner and you're going to keep your license and you're going to charge for this fee, we need to have a standard.
Yep.
And the problem is that, there was prior to that, there was a lot of good financial planners out there that were doing the right thing for people and being able to give a lower level of advice, but at a very cheap, reasonable cost, and help people out. And then they would have had their 10-year, 20-year retirement, 85-page document that would have been more expensive. But the Royal Commission came in and went, no. From now on, you can only provide this standard, this level of advice, and anything below that is now not allowed.
Yep. And one of the other big things that happened was that we had to move from, if you were a client of mine, I didn't have to do an advice document for you every year.
Yeah.
I could have said, look, we don't really need to do anything. There's no changes here. Let's just wait
you're
till
all
next
good.
year.
You're the same. You're in the same job, same position.
Yep.
You know.
So where the Royal Commission came out and said, no. If you're paying an ongoing fee, you must get an advice document every 12 months.
Yeah.
So you take the complexity of the advice and the frequency of the advice into consideration, and that's where the 3 to 4 times multiple in cost comes from.
Yeah.
So the government, and look, as we speak, the government's now considering changing some of those rules and actually relaxing them a little bit, which it'll be interesting to see how that goes. But yeah, it was really that having to say to a lot of people, I can't look after you anymore.
Yeah.
All right.
So really the pendulum swung. I mean, the government had a situation where it was unregulated. Financial planners could pretty much do whatever they wanted to do, and you just had to find one that you trusted and felt was right. Then the pendulum swung right back, and they've gone, no, from now on, this is the level you have to do. You can't go below it, and then off you go.
Yes.
And I think the reason why I bring that up is because a lot of people's trust in regards to financial planning was damaged pre that Royal Commission, because there were people out there that were charging a large fee and giving pretty much no robust or good advice at all, weren't they?
Look, there have been a lot of issues to work through. All right. So, you had some of the big banks that were charging advice to clients that were no longer with us. And there's been some classic cases.
Also people that were already retired.
Yeah, that's right. So there was a lot of examples. All right. So, look, you can get into the detail and understand where those problems lay. And it wasn't universal. It was in probably specific areas within the financial advice industry, but ultimately the industry needed more attention. All right. So I don't begrudge the industry for going that way. It's just a shame that, how heavy the hand of the government's been in that process.
Yeah. So, look, I guess to sum that up, you agree it was a good thing?
Yep.
Yeah, and it's created a much more robust and stronger industry from a financial planning point of view.
Oh, absolutely. All right. So it's come with some pain, but I definitely think the industry is in a much stronger place moving forward now.
Yep.
The affordability thing is being worked on, but it's still an issue.
Yep.
Which in a sense I still see Help My Wealth as being a really powerful tool for the right person, because it just delivers in that gap still. All right. Yeah. So, but yeah, the industry itself is much cleaner and reliable, maybe. Today.
Yeah. Well, essentially Help My Wealth is where it's coming from, is looking after those clients that you can no longer look after. The ones that are actually falling away. And that way you can go, well, hang on, I can actually provide a service for them here without it affecting the financial planning, standard and what you have to do there.
Correct.
Yeah. So look, when you look at investment classes and things like that, would you agree it's probably one of the most misunderstood ideas in Australia?
Yeah. I guess when you say misunderstood, I think that people don't understand why you need to separate them out. All right. So investing is investing, as Hamish, and so it's really understanding how different types of investments work.
Yep.
When you use them, when you don't.
Yep.
There's a lot more to it than possibly what the average person thinks.
Yeah. And I think if you say to someone, oh, look, do you understand, what a share is, what a bond is, what, property investment is, they're like, oh, yeah, I do. But if you start getting into it, why would you choose one or the other? Why would you go property this time and go shares that time? Why would you choose, an investment bond compared to a share, or a managed fund? The intricacies of that, I don't think most people have a good concept around.
No, and look, and a lot of people don't. They make a decision, and sometimes the decision doesn't work for them, and they say it's the investment. Right? What I would say research shows is that it's typically not the investment; it's the choice we made by picking the wrong investment at the wrong time.
Yeah, look, I think property is a great example. That's my background, and when someone comes to me and says, "Oh, I'm worried about my property investment. I feel as though the equity is not going to grow," and you find that it's only been 1 or 2 years since they purchased it. You've got to have that conversation and go. You do realise that property is a 10-year minimum type commitment. If you want to do less than 10 years, you probably would have been better going for like a managed fund where it's really liquid and someone can actually pull that money out quite quickly or move it around or be able to do what they want to do with it. Whereas with property, that's not the sort of class that it is.
And even then, we're all used to the 6 o'clock news where we possibly see the stock market and graphs come up with the ups and downs that go on that. But even understanding that, property tends to behave differently like that. I think, normally I call it the step graph because it has typically a long flat period, which tests patience and people going, is this going to work?
Yep.
Right. So, but it's a natural part of what that investment class does. So, the principles around Help My Wealth are that if we can teach those principles about how to look at these investments, right, then what it means is when they go and see the right professional, they've already got a head start.
Yep.
Right. And one of the other, principles that, we've been, taught over the years is that, if no matter how good or well-intended your advisor is, if you don't understand the strategy that's being put in place, if you don't have the right level of education or literacy around that, then it creates the wrong expectations and has a much greater chance that everything will fall apart at some point down the track.
Yeah. So, from your experience and the clients that you've had, what are some of the stories of people who have either made very fortuitous decisions that they probably didn't actually have an understanding of what they were doing versus those that, same thing, didn't have an understanding but actually caused themselves quite a lot of pain? Have you seen that happen quite often?
Yeah, look, I'm probably going to find it easier to find the painful ones than the good ones at the moment. But, two to come at mind at the moment is, I had a gentleman, and a really basic example, he said to me when we first caught up, don't ever tell me to invest in property. Right. And I said, do you mind me asking why? And he said, well, because we rented out, we had a rental property earlier on and it just didn't work. So again, tell me more about that. And he said, well, it was our home. We'd moved out of it and moved into a different place. And we rented out our home for a couple of years and it just was a nightmare. And so I said to him, well, how do you measure that? How do you determine that was a nightmare? So without sort of going through the whole conversation, what sort of came to pass was that they'd loved that home. There'd been a lot of emotional content.
Yes.
They'd had the debt structure all around the wrong way. So they weren't getting any tax effectiveness. And they had this emotional connection to the property. And of course, nobody had really educated them on the fact that tenants typically won't look after your property as well as what you do. So they've walked into the property 2 years later, seen the damage that was done, had all of this emotion around it because they probably hadn't been prepared in the right place about how to approach that, just sold the property. Right, and sold it for less than what the bank had valued it at when they first turned it into a rental property. So that created all of those. So they didn't hold it for the right length of time. They didn't. It wasn't never really treated as an investment, and so their whole psychology, again, it's that psychology thing, was wrong in terms of how they approached the investment.
Yeah.
So probably another example is. Had a gentleman and around, Bitcoin or cryptocurrency, just didn't understand it, got on, made a few good decisions. It seemed to be going really well for him. It seemed like he had the right, frame of mind for how it went, but probably stopped following the principle, which is around speculation and investment and let it become too large a proportion of his portfolio. And so, at the date we're doing this, which is October 22, there's been a big correction this year in the crypto market, and so that affected him quite a lot. And lovely guy, intelligent guy, just it probably not really kept in line with what good solid principles are in terms of how to run his portfolio.
I think that point you bring up about speculation is really important because it's amazing how when you sit someone down and actually talk through that concept and say, what you're wanting to do, being it crypto or whatever else, has a really high return rate. If it has a really high return rate, probably has a really high risk. So here's the question. I've got no problem with you going into it, but are you willing to lose all of those funds? If you are, great. That is a good speculation. You go for it. But if you have your whole life savings in it, it's probably not the right place for a risky speculation, because you're either going to be one of those people that go, oh, I went into, in this situation, crypto and I made an absolute fortune. Or you're going to be the one that says there's only going to be two stories here, a good or a bad. And again, with my background in real estate, I find that one frustrating when I hear about people that, I had nothing, I was broke, I just, had a part-time job, and now I have 10 houses and it's worth, $15 million, and I've got all these rentals coming in, and I'm going, the only way that occurred was that you had to put yourself so far out in the wind. Do you know what I mean? And it had to go right every time. I guarantee you there is another 10 people with that same story, but the reverse. Where I tried to do it. I read the, 10 properties in 10 weeks book and it just didn't occur. So I think understanding speculation is so important, because we want people to take the money that they've earned. Let's face it, it's hard-earned money. It's like it's been given to us, and actually be able to keep it and grow it, not lose it on something frivolous.
And it's really hard today because information is just so easy to get.
Yes.
And everybody generally will only tell you their positive stories.
Oh, 100%.
So actually, and it's not that they're not true. It's not that the person is not being truthful in a way, but, the avoidance of not balancing that story with the right information can be quite damaging.
Yeah, well, let's face it, we all do it. Even if we go back to that concept of budgeting like we talked about, Hamish, how much do you spend on shoes in a year? It's not until you actually look at the reality of that you realise you spend a lot more than what you thought you did. How much do you spend on coffees per week? Oh, I don't have more than 1 or 2 coffees a week. I don't think I've had a client yet that I've done that budgeting with and actually looked at the actual spend, that they haven't gone, ooh, that's more than what I thought. So, we do it to ourselves on a day-to-day basis. So, of course, when it comes to large speculations and large investments, we're going to do it, in that situation as well. The other one is people's value of their house. How much is your house worth? Oh, it's definitely less, 1.2 million. And you're going, I don't think it is. But people usually always overvalue what they perceive to be the value of their own property or their own lives. Yeah,
what's interesting though, and just to take that last example that you've got, so let's say you bought a house for $700,000, all right, and it was worth 1.2 today, and let's say whether it's 1.1, 1.2 doesn't really matter. So you say it in a way that it looks like you've made $500,000. Right? So, but it's the missing information that says I spent $300,000 on renovations on that property over that period of time as well.
That's right.
That is critical for balancing that story.
Yep. And if it's an investment, how much of that is actually going to be taken in tax?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because if you're going to compare that to other investment options, you need to actually look at those things as well. What was the cost of the repairs? Because in managed funds, there's no repair costs. Yeah. What's the cost of the capital gains compared to if I had invested, some certain amount of money in a managed fund or in shares, and the reverse is that as well. You can take a deposit and you can leverage that with property to get a really good loan, and you can do that with shares as well. But the average person probably wouldn't do that. So it's about going, well, okay, let's be realistic. How much money would have I invested in shares? I wouldn't have invested 300,000, I would have invested my 50. I wasn't going to take that 50 and get a loan for 300. So it's really important that whichever way you're going, when you're comparing it, try and get it back to apples and apples rather than going, I'm comparing apples with watermelons here and coming up with oranges.
Data's great, but learning to interpret it is really important.
Yeah.
I still remember guy said to me, "Oh, look, I'm going to buy an investment property in a particular area." And I said, "Okay, what's the area?" And he told me, and can't remember what it was now. And he said, "Oh, it's experiencing 20% growth." And I went, "Wow, really?" I just couldn't get my head around it. But what I realised was that it was an area with a lot of new estates. Right, so everyone had bought blocks of land, right, and then they'd put homes on it. So they've almost doubled the value of the property, right? And then 5 years later, people start selling it. So it looks like in that area, it's had amazing growth. But my gut feeling is the growth in that area was actually not as strong as what they were talking about, because the median price, or the way Domain presents the information, it just didn't reflect all the money that was being poured into the area from a construction point of view.
No. Well, you go and spend $600,000 on building the house, and they come back and say, "Oh, your house has got 20% growth." Well, you could be under.
That's right.
Under the cost of the land and the build. Yeah. So look, I wanted to also ask you about mentoring and coaching. I mean, you've talked before about the fact that you believe people should get good financial advice. They should get good advice in general, and you're quite strong on the idea of coaching and mentoring. But have you yourself, had coaches and mentors? Do you still have coaches and mentors that you deal with?
Yeah, no, I do. I've actually had the one mentor for, I'm guessing 12 to 13 years now, maybe even a bit longer than that. And I've enjoyed it. I think the challenge is that we've not got to look at mentoring in a short time frame and say, did I get value out of today's meeting? But it's really realising that it's a long-term thing, and you might have a couple of meetings that probably feel like they're a bit flat, and then you could have one or two meetings that you just get so much out of it, it's not funny. And it's typically people measure advice by the positive decisions that are made. Yeah. All right. So, my coach helped me make $100,000. All right. So now that's great. But what we don't tend to do is think about how many mistakes the mentor or the advisor has helped to prevent. So, and that's, that can sometimes be, worth its weight in gold, if I can use that expression.
Totally.
So, sometimes people say to me, but you got to be able to make mistakes in life. And Richard Branson's one that I typically will go back to and go, yeah, okay. But, you look at Richard Branson and he's done extremely well, fascinating personality, but have you got the capacity to go belly up like 4 times?
Yeah.
All right. So, most people just would not be able to bounce back.
And bounce back. Yeah. That's the key, isn't it? Yeah. Look, I know in my own experience, having a mentor and coach, you can't look at it as a weekly or a day-to-day thing. It's when you look back and go, where was I 10 years ago? Where am I now? Not just in my finances, but in other areas of my life. If I didn't have that accountability, if I didn't have that mentoring, if I didn't have that goal setting, would I be where I am now? And it's a definite no for me. It's been quite effective for me.
Yeah, I definitely look. It is, but I don't think the one coach can suit everyone. I do think that there's a personality mix here that you have to find the right person that's offering the right level of service for the right price. And not that price is everything, but it is important. If you're earning, an average wage, then you can't really afford, a coach that might. Pitch to the stars, you've got to find somebody that suits you. All right. So, but yeah, look, I just think it helps me stay more rounded or balanced in terms of how I approach things. Yeah.
So look, I mean, Help My Wealth is very much looking at coaching and mentoring around wealth creation and around a balanced way of viewing money. From your point of view, what do you think people are going to gain by actually joining Help My Wealth in regards to mentoring?
So I think, the balance of this is that this service is not about a heavy load of mentoring. Yeah. It's customizable. But ultimately it's about taking people, providing the right information and instilling if you want to achieve this, if this is important to you, this is what we need to do. All right. So I think it's really important that it's clear, it's concise, it's to the point. Yes. Right? So, and so hopefully you get this I guess, blast or, quick deep dive into, okay, this is what I need to do.
Yes.
All right. So, but ultimately, it's about the decisions we make personally to embrace that and actually enact the changes.
Yeah. And I think it's also about accountability too, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
It's about saying to that person, this is the budget that I want. This is a budget that I'm setting for myself. Let's come back in a month or two's time and actually see whether or not that's been achieved.
Yep.
Because when someone's going to be looking at it other than you, it does change the way in which you make that decision. Should I buy that widget or should I not buy it right now, because I know that in 2 months' time I'm going to be looking at the budget and that $400 widget is probably going to affect that.
I think, yeah. And look, I think one of the principles that we're working on here is it's a bit like that saying, give a man a fish and he'll eat a meal.
Yeah.
Teach him how to fish and he'll eat for life,
Yep.
So this is about, teaching people the skills required to then be self-starting on this.
Yeah. And I think it's important to note as well, like you said, it's not a heavy mentoring, heavy coaching concept because that carries a heavy price tag. When you involve a person and you're asking a person to spend hours of their, month to coach and mentor you, then there's a cost that comes with that. So a bit like the financial planning, Help My Wealth has gone radio. We're trying to fill an area of the market here where people are wanting to get the information they need, have the coach they need, have the support they need, but at the right price.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. So look, in your own time, like what do you have found to be some of the most common myths around financial planning and mortgage broking? I mean, do people often look at you and assume something that's not true?
Yeah, I think, for financial advice, there's still probably a bit of a myth that we're there to sell a product.
Yeah.
All right. So, you're the super guy or you're the insurance guy or whatever. Whereas these days, financial advice is more around the strategy.
Yeah.
Right? So it's actually thinking through a whole range of things. And I quite often say to people, like a financial advisor is a little bit like a doctor, right? So as in a GP, right? So we're a bit of a generalist, we know a lot about a lot of topics. Sometimes we need specialists, but we're not really, we're not there to be the everything for you, if that makes sense, where that can be a bit of an issue as well. Financial planners can specialise. So I think with mortgage brokers, you can tend to find that, people don't understand that we're really trained to deal with loans and bank accounts.
Yep.
All right. So we're not really there for credit cards or, some brokers will specialise in personal loans, others won't. So it's not really it's everything finance. It's, you've got to really ask the broker, what do you do? What don't you do? And sort of take it from there.
Plus, I was going to say these days, especially with the Royal Commission, there's a lot of strictures and structures around what you can and can't offer. So, for instance, people will sometimes say, financial planners are just wanting to sell insurance. But if someone has, insurance in their super fund, to be able to move them to a new product, it's not as simple as just going, I'm going to move you here.
No, absolutely. This is not like car insurance. It's a lot more work. All right.
Yeah, but you've also got to prove that moving them is of value to the client. You can't just say, I'm moving you from ABC to, FJI because I get paid more from FJI than I do from ABC. That is not actually possible.
Yeah, and look, whether we can do that in this podcast or whether we've got to leave it to another one, there is so much around that is, it's good that there's been more structure put in place. It's a little bit painful sometimes because you just want to be able to help somebody, but you realise, oh no, I'm going outside of my realm of experience here. So it can be tricky at times. The other thing I think is really important, and this can be a big difference between the two, is understanding that mortgage brokers typically work for commissions.
Yeah.
All right. So I would say most brokers would say, I'm here to look after the client. All right. So, but ultimately they only get paid if you do a deal with them. All right. So
if you don't get a loan.
No.
There's no money coming.
So if you go in asking for all this advice without any intention of having a loan, there's a good chance you're going to get the wrong experience out of that because it just won't work.
Yeah.
So that can be an issue at times as well.
Yeah, yeah. And so, for you, what do you reckon is the most important lesson you've learned through your professional job, like through being a mortgage broker or financial planner? What was your aha moment?
That people are important.
Yeah.
Right. So, and look, that sounds funny, but, whether it's staff or whether it's clients, and it's so important, relationships,
Yep.
right? Looking after people, putting the right time in, having their best interests at heart is just, to me, I'm continually reminded that, I've had people ring me that I haven't talked to for 10 years, right, that have come back and say, I still remember what advice you gave me. Do you mind if I refer my sister to you or something like that?
Yes.
And, I love it. I love that we have this ability to have this impact on people.
Yeah, and we've talked about it before. Whether you're a mortgage broker or a financial planner, you're dealing with people's greatest financial assets. And so there's a lot of emotion, a lot of heart, a lot of planning, a lot of future hope that's tied up in those, investments or in those products. And, you've said it to me before that it's interesting. I think you've made the idea of communication a bit of a hobby or an interest for yourself. You're very careful how you communicate with people, and you're also, I've noticed that you spend a lot of time trying to tease out of people what they're actually wanting.
Look, yeah, absolutely. And I think part of that comes from it's a little bit like financial literacy. If you said to me, are we taught the English language? I would say, yeah, we're taught grammar and words and how to spell things and all the rest of it. But if you said to me, are we really taught how to communicate? So I would say no. There's a book I love. It's called Everyone Communicates But Few Connect.
Yep.
By John Maxwell. And I find that a really powerful sort of topic in general, because there is just such a need for us to be able to push through that almost that superficial barrier that we all have up around, okay, I'll get to know you, but only so much.
Yes, and I think for an individual, we don't even know ourselves or what we want ourselves sometimes. We say, how often have you had one person say one thing, but they actually are meaning something else?
Yeah.
Or they say, this is my goal, I want to achieve this, but they actually are really meaning that they want to achieve this.
Yeah, one of my favourite responses from people when you start getting into things like that is, I've never really thought about it from that perspective. That's interesting, something like that, because you've sort of broken through there a little bit and got them to really start thinking about what it is that's going on.
Yeah, and it only gets more complicated when there's a partner involved, because, I do love that analogy you've mentioned to me before, and that is that both couples, like both people in the couple, they have the same end goal. Whatever that is, we want this much by retirement. We want to be able to live, a life with some freedom and some choices. We want whatever it is they want. It tends to be the same end goal, but how they're going to get there can be vastly, vastly different. And so to try to bring them in on the page, and what I love about what you do is that for you, tying in that end goal is so important, so that you can keep saying to them, I know we're really far apart right now, but you're going from A, B, C, D to get to E, and this person's going, D, B, C to get to E. But in the end, we all want to get to E, and that's been actually, a bit of a goal for you to learn how to, talk people around to that.
Yeah, and we typically start talking about the goals almost in the wrong way. So quite often what I say to people is, look, think of whether it's super or shares or property or whatever, they're tools.
Yeah.
All right. So the goal is different.
Yeah.
So, typically we want safety, we want comfort, we want peace. We want those things, and it's about saying, well, what tools and what timing do we need to be able to get to those destinations? In most couples, I wouldn't say all, but I'd say a good chunk of couples you talk to, usually one, is more of that safety is more important. And one, there's almost thrill is more important.
It's funny how we tend to attract the opposite person, isn't it?
Oh, look, absolutely.
I know when I'm doing property and we look at risk, sort of assessments, it's amazing how often people are not both balanced. One is risk adverse and one is really happy to fly by the seat of their pants, burning as they go through the gate. Yeah,
absolutely. And as we talk about in our modules, we're shaped by our experiences.
Yes.
So, the person that safety is important. When you dig into it, sometimes they want safety for the right reasons, but sometimes their version of safety is actually not safety. And so trying to tease that out and get them to explore what it means to feel safe is important as well.
I had a great example of that where a client who they were so risk averse and they were so big on being safe and being balanced that they couldn't make decisions. But their lack of decision making has actually created an unbalanced, a higher risk situation, which is the opposite of what they want. But getting into a point of going, do you see that you're pushing off that decision has created this environment that you're actually unhappy with? And once you point that out to them, you can see they sort of go, oh, it's not what I was hoping to achieve.
Yeah, I think they call it opportunity cost. It's understanding the alternative and trying to compare the two, which can be a bit tricky at times. But
So Hamish, something we always like to ask all of our guests is if you could go back and talk to your 18-year-old self, what sort of advice would you give them with all of the knowledge that you've had both professionally and personally over the last few years? I say a few years, but
a few years, that's right. So look, I think my favourite saying is the story is not finished yet.
Yep.
And so I think that, especially for a young person or earlier in life, that just keep going.
Yeah.
The story is not finished yet. It might not feel like life's going according to plan at the moment, but the story is not finished yet.
It is a thing, isn't it? I know when I was young, every bump, every issue, it felt like it was the end of the world.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, you look back and you go, yeah, that was hard, but you get through it. But it's hard to have that attitude, isn't it, when you're 18? That's for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, absolutely. And I think. When you think through that sort of analogy or that statement, it does. It just sort of goes, okay, keep pushing.
Yeah.
And it's like, what is it? The little caboose that could?
I thought it was a little train, but hey, we can go with caboose.
That's right.
So look, the other thing I like to ask my guests is if you're going to write a book, what would the title be? What would you write a book on? Would it be on finances? Would it be on something else? What would you do?
Look, in all honesty, probably what I'd like to be able to write about is just stories about clients.
Yes.
Is
that legal?
Yeah, well, not really. But the reason for that is, and obviously I would keep people's stories anonymous, but there's so much power in being able to talk through what that you're not the only one going through this.
Yep.
And I must admit, that's what I actually enjoy. I enjoy those stories of other businesses and other people that have done things and seen their highs and lows and they've still been able to get there wherever there is.
It was Mark Twain who said that reality or life is stranger than fiction. He made the comment once that the stories that he had heard that had happened to real people, if he wrote those as novels, people wouldn't believe it. They'd say it's not a very believable book because often those real experiences are stranger and different. But so important. I don't know if you've ever read the book by Jeffrey Archer, Cat of Nine Tails, when he was in jail. And he actually ended up writing, the 9 short stories, I think it was, on people's real, like he got permission, obviously changed their names and whatever else, but on different things they did and what he'd heard in jail. And reading that, all his other books are all fiction, but reading that book, knowing that he was actually writing about a real story, it had a higher impact, I think, when you're going, wow, this was a real person that he met who was in jail because of this event that, happened in their life,
Yeah, I think most of us, I don't know. Yeah, most of us, I think, we actually have stories that are worth telling.
Totally.
I think it's a guy, Matt Church, that talks about this in a book, where he basically says, people can't argue with your story. It's your story.
No, it's true. It's your story. It's what happened.
And we might think our stories are boring. All right. So, but ultimately, people, we can learn from each other.
Yeah. Now, look, when we say that and we talk about stories being boring, I have a sneaking suspicion that you have a good story. Something about being naked, Prime Minister's bedroom, water.
Look, if I was going to put something, in the Dibbic's bookshore or something like that, then, it would start off with, let me tell you when I was naked with the Prime Minister's wife.
Now, that is that the title of the book or just the chapter?
Look, it could be chapter 3, but maybe it'd come on the front page somewhere just because it'd sell.
Yeah, well, yeah, and I would like people to know this is a true story, but you better explain it or we'll have complaints.
Yeah, well, the missing piece of information in here is that I was 10 at the time. Right? So, and it was when Malcolm Fraser was in power. All right. So we're going back a while, and essentially, I fell into the fish pond at the lodge. All right. So
as you do when you're 10 years old.
Absolutely. So, so whilst the rest of my class, because it was a school event, was downstairs,
luncheoning with the Prime Minister.
I was upstairs in the Prime Minister's bedroom. Being stripped down by his wife so that I could have my clothes cleaned and
sitting in his robe.
Yeah, look, absolutely. Just, and being brought up, some scraps and morsels.
It's funny. I think at the time a 10-year-old would have been very upset that he wasn't downstairs luncheoning with the Prime Minister.
No.
But, older Hamish does like to be able to say, did I ever tell you about the time that I was naked in the Prime Minister's bedroom with his wife wearing his robe?
That's right. That's right, yeah. So
I think that really does encompass the Mark Twain concept that, fact is stranger than fiction sometimes, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. So now the whole world knows.
Now the whole world knows. Well, our listeners know anyway. And, we're a community and they love you.
Yeah,
so it's
absolutely.
all good. Look, Hamish, thank you for coming. I really appreciate you having as a guest in our show. I very much appreciate what you wrote for us on the Help My Wealth modules in regards to investments. It was very insightful, and I'm looking forward to seeing other modules you write for us over time. But look, we just appreciate it and thank you for all that you've done for us.
Look, and it's a community effort, like you talk about community, but, without the other professionals actually doing it on its own, it wouldn't have very much value.
No, that's right. That's right. It's bringing that all together that actually makes it effective, isn't it?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you for coming, and thank you all for listening. As always, at Help My Wealth, we're about empowering your financial journey. Today, we've done that by talking to Hamish about life and investments and financial planning and so forth. I hope it's been helpful for you. If it has, please like and follow our podcast. As always, in the notes, if you want to go to Help My Wealth, there are links there for you to be able to go and see what services are that you can actually utilise for yourself. Otherwise, we'll see you again next time, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
The information discussed by the Help My Wealth and the Money Rules podcast is for education and entertainment purposes only and is general in nature, and it is not advice. It is not intended as a substitute for professional finance, legal or tax advice. It is aimed to provide a general understanding of each topic and should not be relied upon to make an investment or financial decision. It is strongly suggested that you seek professional advice regarding your own individual circumstances before making a financial decision. Help My Wealth and the hosts of the Money Rules and Money Rules podcast are not aware of your personal financial circumstances. Before making any financial decisions, you should read the product disclosure statement and, if necessary, consult a licensed financial professional. Do not take financial advice from a podcast. In the spirit of reconciliation, Help My Wealth and the Money Rules or Money Rules podcasts acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to past, present and emerging elders. We extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people today.